On any given night, a billionaire exchanges luxury for anonymity to dine with his son in a simple diner. But everything changes when the boy decides to share his hamburger with a hungry girl. The child's innocent gesture triggers an unexpected connection between two families from opposite worlds. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will hear in your life. Friday night in New York City brought with it the frantic rhythm that characterizes the largest metropolis in the United States. The streetlights reflected in the puddles of water left by the afternoon rain, and the smell of wet asphalt mixed with the aroma of food escaping from the diners and restaurants scattered across the west side of the city. It was one of those ordinary nights, seemingly like so many others, where millions of stories intersect without anyone noticing the magnitude of the encounters that fate prepares. In a small diner in the neighborhood of Astoria, a simple and welcoming establishment that had been operating at the same address for over 20 years, the tables were occupied by families, couples, and groups of friends seeking an unpretentious meal after a tiring day of work. The walls were decorated with old pictures of New York, black and white photographs that showed the city in simpler times, when everything seemed less urgent and more human. The smell of burgers on the griddle and fresh out of the fryer French fries filled the air, creating that sense of comfort that only homemade food can provide. At a discreet table near the window overlooking the busy street sat Michael Stevens. At 42, he was one of the most successful businessmen in the country, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the United States, with projects spread across several states and a net worth that surpassed the billions. But that night, wearing a simple navy blue polo shirt, faded jeans, and comfortable sneakers, he looked nothing like the tycoons who graced the covers of business magazines. His brown hair already showed a few gray strands at the temples, and his face, though marked by the responsibility of commanding a business empire, maintained a soft and approachable expression. Beside him, swinging his legs under the chair in a rhythmic and carefree motion that only children can manage, was Gabriel, his 7-year-old son. The boy had the same deep brown eyes as his father, but carried in his wide, infectious smile a pure joy that Michael had long forgotten how to feel. Gabriel wore a jersey of his favorite soccer team and had a bandage on his left knee, the result of a fall on the school playground that very afternoon. This Friday night ritual had become sacred for the two of them. Ever since Michael had lost his wife, Marina, 3 years ago, a victim of an illness that slowly consumed her and left an impossible void to fill, he had promised himself that he would dedicate quality time to his son. Not the rushed time between meetings, not the minutes stolen from a packed schedule, but real, genuine moments where he could be just a father, not the businessman everyone knew. Marina had been the love of his life, his partner since their college days in engineering school, when he was still just a dreamy student who scribbled projects in old notebooks and believed he could change the world. Through architecture, she had been his foundation, his advisor, the woman who supported him when he decided to leave his stable job at a multinational corporation to start his own company. The early years were difficult, with sleepless nights and debts that seemed impossible to pay, but Marina never doubted. She worked as a literature teacher during the day and at night helped Michael organize spreadsheets, review contracts, and keep hope alive when everything seemed to be falling apart. When Gabriel was born 7 years after their wedding, Marina had dedicated herself completely to motherhood, but she never stopped being the first person Michael consulted before making any major business decisions. She had that quiet wisdom, that ability to see beyond the numbers and understand people, and it was precisely this humanized vision that transformed Michael's company into something more than just concrete and steel constructions. Marina's passing left a hole that Michael tried to fill by burying himself in work. But Gabriel needed a present father, not a ghost who slept at the office and only showed up to say goodnight. That's how the Friday nights at the diner in Astoria began, far from the sophisticated restaurants where businessmen, like him, were usually seen, far from the prying eyes and forced conversations about business and investments. In that simple environment, Michael could breathe. He could be just a man taking his son out for a burger, sharing a chocolate milkshake, and listening to the excited stories about schoolmates' favorite cartoons and the wild plans that only a child's mind can create. Gabriel talked non-stop, gesturing with his still small hands, telling him about the goal he almost scored during recess, about the new math teacher who was really nice, and about the dog he had seen on the street that he was sure was lost. Michael listened to everything with genuine attention, asking questions, laughing at his son's funny observations, and feeling, for the first time that week, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. There were no spreadsheets to review, no investors to impress, no constant pressure of keeping an empire running. There, at that table, he was just a father, and that was enough. The waiter brought their order, a deluxe burger for Michael, another for Gabriel, a generous portion of crispy French fries and a large chocolate milkshake to share, with 2 colorful straws that Gabriel always insisted on choosing. The boy attacked the food with the voracious appetite typical of his age, dipping the fries in ketchup with a technique perfected over months of visits to the place. It was at that moment, as Michael watched his son with a discreet smile on his face, that the diner door opened. A gust of cold night air entered along with 2 figures who immediately caught his attention, not because of any noise or ostentation, but for the exact opposite, for the almost invisible way they tried to occupy the smallest possible space in the world. It was a young woman, appearing to be around 28 or 30, with a little girl of about 5 in her arms. The woman had dark brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, a few rebellious strands escaping and framing a face with delicate features, but marked by exhaustion. Her eyes were large and expressive, a hazel hue that carried untold stories, and in them was that particular glint of someone who learns to find hope, even when circumstances insist on extinguishing it. She wore worn-out jeans with cleaning product stains that hadn't come out despite countless washes, and a sea-green knit top that had seen better days. On her feet, a pair of scuffed white sneakers with the sole beginning to peel away on the right side. The little girl in her arms had the same large, curious eyes as her mother, and she wore a little pink dress that was at least 2 sizes too small, the sleeves tight on her chubby arms and the hem barely reaching her knees. Her curly hair was tied with a makeshift ribbon, and she clutched a small, faded teddy bear, clearly the only toy she owned. The woman approached the 2, counter with hesitant steps, as if afraid of intruding on a space that didn't belong to her. Her posture was withdrawn, her shoulders slightly hunched forward, and her movements had that caution of someone accustomed to apologizing for existing. When she reached the counter attendant, her voice came out low, almost a polite whisper that had to compete with the noise of conversations and the bustle of the kitchen. "Just a cup of water, please." The phrase was spoken with a politeness that bordered on reverence, and Michael, even from a distance, could sense the nuance of shame mixed with necessity in that simple request. The attendant, a young man with a tired expression from being at the end of a long shift, nodded mechanically and served the water in a disposable cup. The woman thanked him quietly, took the cup, and turned to find a place where she could sit without disturbing anyone. It was then that the little girl in her arms turned her head and her eyes fixed on the surrounding tables, watching the plates go by, the families eating, the unmistakable smell of food that made her empty stomach complain silently. Michael saw the little girl press her lips together, trying not to show the hunger she surely felt. He saw her bury her face in her mother's neck, not to hide, but so she wouldn't have to look at what she couldn't have. And he saw, with a pang in his chest that caught him by surprise, the mother stroking her daughter's hair and whispering something he couldn't hear, but which was certainly a promise that they would eat at home, that soon everything would be okay, that they just needed to hold on a little longer. It was Gabriel who broke the trance that had taken hold of Michael. The boy had stopped eating and was staring at the little girl. It wasn't a look of pity or superiority, but something much purer and simpler. It was empathy, that childlike ability to recognize a need in another and want to help without judgment or ulterior motives. "Dad, look at that little girl." Gabriel's voice came out in a whisper, but it was filled with a genuine concern that made Michael's heart ache. "I see her, son." "She's hungry," Gabriel stated, not as a question but as a fact his child's eyes had detected with a precision that adults often lose over time. Michael watched his son, waiting to see where this conversation would lead. Gabriel looked at his plate, still half full, looked at the little girl again, and then turned his eyes back to his father, with that serious expression children make when they are about to say something very important. "Can I share my burger with her, Dad?" Gabriel asked, and in that question was an innocence so pure, a kindness so natural, that Michael felt his eyes sting. It was as if Marina were there in that moment, speaking through the son. They had raised together, reminding him that the values she had always championed were alive and flourishing in that little boy's heart. Michael didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward slightly, observing his son with an admiration that went far beyond paternal pride. Here was living proof that, despite all his flaws, despite all his absences, and all the moments he had felt like an inadequate father, Gabriel was becoming an extraordinary human being. "You know, son, I think we can do something even better," Michael said, his voice coming out huskier than he intended, thick with emotion. "How about we invite them to sit here with us and have something to eat? What do you think?" Gabriel's eyes lit up as if all the Christmas lights had been turned on at once. "Really, Dad? Can I go ask them?" "Yes, you can. But be gentle, okay? Some people are proud and might feel embarrassed, so you go over there, offer politely, and if she says no, we respect that. Deal?" "Deal." Gabriel was already sliding off his chair, his eyes shining with the excitement of someone about to do a good deed. Michael watched as his son timidly approached the woman and the little girl, who had found a corner near the exit where they were trying to take up as little space as possible. Gabriel stood in front of them, shifting slightly from one foot to the other, that typical nervousness of children about to speak to strangers. "Hi," Gabriel's voice came out soft but firm. "I'm Gabriel, and that's my dad over there." He pointed to Michael, who gave a discreet wave. The woman looked at Gabriel in surprise, then at Michael, and in her eyes was a mixture of caution and curiosity. The little girl, for her part, hugged her teddy bear tighter, but a small smile began to form at the corner of her mouth. "Hi, Gabriel," the woman replied, her voice still restrained. "I'm Julia, and this is Sophia, my daughter." "Nice to meet you." Gabriel gave a little bow, something Michael had taught him about politeness and respect. Then he took a deep breath and continued. "We were eating over there, but there's a lot of food, you know, and I thought maybe you could sit with us. My dad said you can order whatever you want. We'd really like your company." Julia was paralyzed for a moment, processing the unexpected invitation. Her first instinct was to refuse, to thank them politely and get out of there as quickly as possible before the shame completely consumed her. But then she looked at Sophia, saw her daughter's eyes shining as she heard Gabriel's words, saw how the little girl was already smiling at this strange boy who was offering something so simple and so precious at the same time, food and company. "I don't know if it's appropriate," Julia began, her voice trembling slightly. "We don't want to bother you." Gabriel shook his head vigorously. "You're not bothering us at all. We love making new friends, right, Sophia?" He addressed the little girl directly, who was now hiding her face in her mother's shoulder, but peeking at Gabriel with curiosity between strands of her hair. That's when Michael stood up and approached, sensing that Julia needed more reassurance to accept the invitation. He kept a respectful distance, not wanting to invade their personal space, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle and sincere. "Good evening. Forgive my forwardness, but my son is right. It would be a pleasure to have you join us for dinner. No strings attached, no ulterior motives, just two families sharing a meal. And look, I'll be honest with you. Since I lost my wife, I've been trying to teach Gabriel about empathy and kindness. Letting him practice those values would be a gift to me as well." The mention of losing his wife caught Julia by surprise. There was a vulnerability in those words, a sincerity that couldn't be faked. She looked into Michael's eyes and saw something that completely disarmed her. Humanity. There was no pity there, no superiority or ostentatious charity. There was just a genuine invitation from someone who understood somehow about loss and about the importance of small gestures of kindness in the midst of life's chaos. Julia felt tears welling up, but she swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a shaky smile. "Okay, we accept. Thank you for your kindness." Gabriel celebrated with a discreet little smile and immediately took Sophia's hand, who looked to her mother for silent permission. Julia nodded, and the two children walked hand in hand to the table, leaving the adults a few steps behind. Michael gestured politely for Julia to go ahead, and when they reached the table, he pulled out a chair for her, an automatic gesture of chivalry that made Julia feel, for the first time in a long time, treated with dignity. Gabriel was already helping Sophia climb into the chair next to his, offering the teddy bear its own spot on the table, as if the toy were also an important guest. "What would you like to eat?" Michael asked, picking up the menu and handing it to Julia. "Please choose whatever you like. The burgers here are excellent, and kids usually love the milkshakes. But there are other options too, sandwiches, salads, whatever you prefer." Julia held the menu with hands that trembled slightly. It had been so long since someone had offered her the choice of what to eat that the feeling was almost surreal. Normally her meals were calculated to the penny, always the cheapest, always just enough to quell hunger, never to truly satisfy. A plain burger would be fine, and a juice for Sophia if it's not too much trouble. Julia's voice came out controlled, trying not to show how much this meant to her. "No trouble at all, and for you, Julia, milkshake, soda, juice," Michael insisted gently. "A juice is great, thank you." Michael called the waiter and placed the order, including an extra portion of French fries and chicken nuggets for the children to share. While they waited for the food to arrive, Gabriel and Sophia were already chatting animatedly, with that ease only children have for forming instant bonds. Gabriel showed Sophia the drawings he had made on a napkin, simple figures of superheroes and dinosaurs, and Sophia laughed, swinging her little legs under the chair in a rhythm that mirrored the sudden joy that had taken her over. Michael and Julia watched the children's interaction, a comfortable silence settling between them. It was Michael who broke the silence first, his voice low so as not to interrupt the lively conversation of the little ones. "Do you live here in Astoria?" Julia hesitated for a moment before answering. "I live nearby in Sunnyside. I rent a room in a shared apartment. It's small, but it's enough for the two of us." Michael nodded, asking no more questions, respecting her privacy. Julia felt grateful for that, for him not forcing a conversation about her situation, not asking invasive questions about Sophia's father or how she supported herself. There was a delicacy about this man that surprised her. "And you?" Julia found herself asking, curious despite herself. "Do you live around here too?" "Not too far. I live on the Upper East Side with Gabriel, but I like coming here on Fridays. It's more relaxed, you know, away from the hustle." Michael chose his words carefully, not wanting to sound pretentious by mentioning one of New York's most expensive neighborhoods. Julia caught the hesitation and understood there was more to the story than he was letting on, but she didn't press. Instead, she turned her attention back to Sophia, who was laughing at something Gabriel had said, and felt her heart warm at the sight of her daughter so happy. The food arrived a few minutes later, and the table transformed into a small feast. Sophia looked at the burger in front of her with wide eyes, as if she were seeing a work of art. Julia had to hold back tears when she saw her daughter take the first bite, her eyes closing in genuine pleasure as she savored something that wasn't just reheated rice and beans. Gabriel, with the naturalness typical of children, started sharing his French fries with Sophia, creating a sort of game where they tried to toss the fries into each other's mouths, laughing when they missed and celebrating when they made it. Michael and Julia exchanged knowing glances, the kind of silent communication parents develop when they watch their children do something adorable. As the meal progressed, Julia's initial tension began to dissipate. She started to relax, to join the conversation, to laugh at Gabriel's jokes, and to share little stories about Sophia. She told him how the girl loved to draw, even if it was just with crayons on recycled paper. She told him how Sophia made up funny songs about everything, from brushing her teeth to tying her shoes. Michael listened to everything with genuine attention, asking questions, truly interested in the answers. There was a quiet strength in Julia that impressed him deeply. Even though she was clearly going through difficulties, she maintained an unshakable dignity, a sweetness in her eyes, and a devotion to her daughter that was palpable in every word, every gesture. By the time they finished eating, Gabriel and Sophia were practically best friends. Sophia had gifted Gabriel a drawing she made on a napkin, a figure that was supposed to be a flying superhero, and Gabriel had promised to bring some of his old toys the next time they met, a promise made with such conviction that neither Michael nor Julia had the heart to question it. It was getting late when they finally got up from the table. Michael paid the bill discreetly, not making a fuss about it, and when Julia tried to protest, he simply said it had been a pleasure to have their company, and that Gabriel was much happier than he would have been if they had dined alone. At the diner door, the two families said their goodbyes. Sophia hugged Gabriel tightly, whispering a thank you that made the boy grin from ear to ear. Julia shook Michael's hand, and in that handshake was a gratitude that went far beyond the food. It was gratitude for her dignity being preserved, for the respect shown, for the shared humanity. As Michael and Gabriel walked to the car, the boy couldn't stop talking about Sophia, about how cool she was, about how he wanted to see her again. Michael listened, a soft smile on his face, thinking about Julia and how that chance encounter had stirred something inside him that had been dormant for a long time. Across the street, Julia held Sophia's hand as they walked towards the bus stop. The little girl was still chattering excitedly about Gabriel, about the delicious food, about how it had been the best night of her life. And Julia, looking up at the stars that were barely visible between the New York buildings, allowed herself to feel something she had forgotten. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, life still held good surprises. Hope that kindness still existed in the world. Hope that she and Sophia were not completely alone on this difficult journey. None of them knew that night that this seemingly chance encounter was just the beginning of a story that would forever change the course of their lives. Sometimes fate presents itself in simple ways, in unpretentious diners, through the pure empathy of a child and the courage to accept help when pride screams to refuse. And sometimes it is precisely in these most unlikely moments that we find exactly what we didn't even know we were looking for. The days that followed that encounter at the diner brought a strange restlessness to Julia. She found herself thinking about that kind man and his polite son, questioning whether the gesture had been genuine or just a fleeting act of charity that the rich perform to ease their conscience. Life experience had taught Julia that wealthy people rarely mingled with people like her without some ulterior motive, and this mistrust was so ingrained in her heart that it was difficult to simply accept that kindness could exist without expecting anything in return. But Sophia did not share these suspicions. The little girl talked about Gabriel, every day recounting every detail of that magical night, as if she were reminiscing about a wonderful dream. She drew her new friend on every piece of paper she could find, created imaginary stories where they were superheroes saving the world together, and every night before bed, she would ask her mother when they would see Gabriel and his father again. Julia always answered with a maybe, not wanting to build up expectations in a child who already had so little and didn't deserve another disappointment. Life had already taken so much from Sophia, starting with a father who never wanted to acknowledge his paternity and disappeared as soon as he learned of the pregnancy, leaving Julia alone to face early motherhood at 23. At that time, Julia worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic, earning a modest but sufficient salary to support herself. She lived with her mother, Teresa, in a simple apartment in the Bronx. She had plans, dreams of going to college for education, of becoming a teacher, of giving herself a better life, and eventually the family she imagined building one day. The unplanned pregnancy turned everything upside down. Her boyfriend, Ryan, who had sworn eternal love and plans for the future, revealed his true colors when he saw the 2 lines on the pregnancy test. He accused Julia of getting pregnant on purpose to trap him, said cruel things that were etched into her soul like invisible scars, and vanished without a trace. Julia tried to find him, tried to make him take responsibility, but Ryan simply disappeared, moved to another city, blocked all contact, and left behind a young, scared, and pregnant woman alone. Teresa was the pillar that kept Julia standing during the pregnancy. Her mother, a strong woman who had raised Julia alone after her husband abandoned them when she was only 3, knew the pain of helplessness all too well, and did everything to ensure her daughter wouldn't go through the same. She worked double shifts, picked up extra hours as a cook in a diner, and when Sophia was born, she was the most devoted grandmother a child could have. But life has a particular cruelty in taking from us the very ones we love most. Teresa, who had smoked since she was 15 and could never quit despite her daughter's pleas, began to have health problems when Sophia turned 2. Doctors detected a severe respiratory complication, aggravated by decades of smoking and working conditions in poorly ventilated kitchens. She fought for over a year, trying to hide from Julia how much she was suffering, trying to be strong until the very end. When Teresa passed away, she took with her not only the unconditional love of a grandmother, but also the fragile financial stability that had kept Julia and Sophia minimally secure. The apartment was rented, and without her mother's extra income, Julia couldn't keep up with the payments. She had to leave her job at the clinic to care for Sophia, who was too young for daycare and there was no one else to help. She sold what furniture she could to pay off the medical debts Teresa had left behind, and suddenly found herself completely alone in the world with a small child to raise. That's how Julia started working as a house cleaner, taking sporadic cleaning jobs through referrals and service apps. It was uncertain, unstable work, where some months she earned a reasonable income and others she barely had enough to pay the rent for the small room she shared with Sophia. There were no labor rights, no paid time off, no holiday bonuses. It was living one day at a time, praying there would be no emergencies, that Sophia wouldn't get sick, that the landlord wouldn't raise the rent. But Julia never let Sophia see the weight she carried. To the little girl, life was full of adventures. The small room was a magic castle. The rice and eggs for dinner were a special recipe prepared with love. The clothes Julia bought at thrift stores were treasures found in secret shops. And when there was no money for new toys, Julia created games with cardboard boxes, made up enchanting bedtime stories, and turned scarcity into creativity. It was a difficult, exhausting life, but Julia held her head high. She maintained her dignity. She never begged, never accepted favors that made her feel inferior, and she raised Sophia with the same values Teresa had taught her: respect, honesty, and gratitude for the little things. On the Monday after the meeting at the diner, Julia woke up before sunrise, as she always did. She had 3 houses scheduled to clean, and she needed to leave Sophia with Mrs. Davis, the elderly neighbor who watched the girl in exchange for small favors and a symbolic amount that Julia paid when she could. She prepared a simple breakfast, woke Sophia with kisses on her face, dressed the girl in one of her least mended outfits, and left for another day of hard work. The first house was in Chelsea, an apartment belonging to a young couple who worked all day and needed someone to keep everything organized. Julia cleaned, ironed, organized, always with the meticulous care of someone who treats others' belongings with respect. The second house was on the Upper West Side, a larger residence where a family with 3 children and 2 dogs lived. The work was tougher, but the owner was kind and always left a prepared lunch for Julia, a gesture she was immensely grateful for. The third house of the day was in a high-end condominium on the Upper East Side. Julia had been referred by another cleaner who couldn't make it, and she was nervous because she had never worked in that area before. The doorman greeted her coldly, asked for her ID with a tone that made it clear she wasn't welcome, and escorted her to the apartment as if she were a suspect. When Julia entered the apartment, she had to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. It was enormous, with high ceilings, huge windows overlooking an internal courtyard, marble floors that reflected the natural light, and decor that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. There were paintings on the walls that looked like real works of art, sophisticated designer furniture, and a kitchen that was larger than the entire apartment where Julia lived. The owner, a middle-aged woman dressed in expensive clothes and with an air of superiority she didn't bother to hide, gave quick instructions and left, leaving Julia alone in the intimidating space. She started her work in the bathroom, then moved to the bedrooms, organized the living room, and cleaned the gleaming kitchen that was obviously rarely used. She was finishing mopping the balcony when she heard voices coming from the office next to the main living room. The door was ajar, and Julia could see through the crack a group of well-dressed men sitting around a large table. They were clearly in a business meeting talking about investments, stocks, numbers that made Julia's head spin. That's when a familiar voice caught her attention, a voice she was sure she had heard before but couldn't quite place. Curious but not wanting to be intrusive, Julia moved a little closer, just enough to peek discreetly through the opening. And that's when her heart almost stopped. Sitting at the head of the table, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit that probably cost the equivalent of 6 months of Julia's rent, was Michael. The same man who had invited her and Sophia to dinner at the simple diner in Astoria. Only now he looked nothing like the relaxed father in jeans and a polo shirt. Now he exuded authority, power, confidence. Julia froze, hidden behind the door, listening as Michael spoke naturally about a corporate merger that would move hundreds of millions of dollars, about construction projects in several states, about international expansion strategies. The other men at the table listened to him with reverent attention, taking notes, agreeing with his observations, clearly impressed by his business acumen. That's when Julia understood. This wasn't just a successful man. This was someone who lived in a completely different universe from hers, a universe of luxury penthouses, imported cars, international travel, and decisions that affected thousands of jobs. And she, Julia, was just one among thousands of anonymous women who cleaned the apartments of these powerful men, invisible to the eyes of those who occupied the highest rungs of the social ladder. Shame washed over her like a tidal wave. Julia felt her face burn, her stomach churn, her legs go weak. How could she have been so naive to think that dinner invitation had been genuine? How had she allowed Sophia to build up expectations of friendship with a boy who probably attended expensive private schools and spent his holidays at resorts in Europe? How had she let herself believe, even for a moment, that people from such different worlds could truly connect? Without making a sound, Julia returned to the service area where she had left her cleaning supplies. She finished her work with trembling hands, put everything away quickly, and left the apartment through the service door, relieved not to have to pass through the living room and risk Michael seeing her there, in that position, in that condition. The difference between them had never been so brutal, so painfully clear. On the bus ride home, Julia stared out the window without really seeing the city pass by. Her mind was racing, replaying every moment of that night at the diner, reinterpreting everything in a new light. It had been charity, pity. A rich man feeling good about himself for doing a good deed for the less fortunate. And she, foolish and desperate, had accepted, had let Sophia get her hopes up, had allowed that moment to create hopes that now had to be crushed. When she got home and picked up Sophia from Mrs. Davis's, the little girl came running, all excited, holding a drawing she had made during the day. It was Gabriel and her, holding hands under a colorful rainbow. Julia looked at that drawing and felt her heart break into tiny pieces. That night, as she prepared a simple dinner of rice, beans, and a fried egg, Julia made a decision. She had to protect Sophia from a greater disappointment. She had to cut this connection before the girl became too attached, before the cruel reality of their social differences hurt her daughter even more. She decided that if Michael tried to contact her, she would make excuses. If they met by chance, she would be polite but distant. She would build a protective wall around herself and Sophia, because in Julia's experience, walls were safer than bridges when it came to protecting the heart. What Julia didn't know was that Michael was also thinking about her. Since that night at the diner, he couldn't get Julia and Sophia out of his head. There was something about the quiet strength of that woman that had touched him deeply. The way she looked at her daughter with so much love, despite the obvious difficulties she faced. The dignity she maintained even in a clearly difficult situation. The genuine gratitude in her eyes when she accepted the dinner invitation. Michael had met many women since losing Marina. Beautiful, intelligent, successful women. Women his business friends introduced him to at sophisticated dinners. Women who moved in the same social circles, who understood the business world, and knew how to navigate the complexities of New York's high society. But none of them had stirred anything in him beyond polite, forgettable conversation. They all seemed like interchangeable versions of the same person, talking about the same things, sharing the same superficial values, interested more in his net worth than in who he really was. Julia was different. There was an authenticity to her that Michael hadn't seen in years, a simplicity that didn't mean a lack of depth, but quite the opposite. And Gabriel, who had become withdrawn and quiet after his mother's death, had completely lit up in Sophia's presence, laughing and playing in a way Michael hadn't seen in a long time. That's why Michael did something none of his advisors would approve of. He picked up his cell phone, searched through the unsaved numbers until he found the only call record from that Friday, when he had discreetly asked the diner waiter for Julia's number, who knew her because she sometimes stopped by for water for Sophia. He had saved that number like a treasure, not knowing if he would have the courage to use it, not wanting to seem invasive or ill-intentioned. Now, sitting in his home office while Gabriel slept in the next room, Michael typed a simple message. "Hi, Julia. It's Michael, Gabriel's dad. Gabriel can't stop talking about Sophia. We were thinking of going to Central Park on Sunday. Would you like to join us?" He reread the message 5 times before he had the courage to hit send. When he finally did, he stared at the phone screen like an anxious teenager waiting for a response to his first date invitation. 5 minutes passed, 10, 20. No reply. Michael began to question if he had done the right thing, if he hadn't crossed some invisible line, if Julia wasn't feeling pressured or uncomfortable. Across the city, in the cramped room she shared with Sophia, Julia stared at the message on the screen of her old phone. Her first instinct was to delete it and block the number, to stick to her decision to pull away, to protect herself and Sophia from eventual disappointment. But then she looked at her daughter sleeping beside her, hugging the worn-out teddy bear, a serene smile on her face, probably dreaming of her new friend Gabriel. Julia sighed deeply. Maybe she was being unfair. Maybe she was projecting onto Michael all the prejudices and hurts she carried from other experiences. Maybe, just maybe, there were good people in the world who did kind things without ulterior motives. And even if she was wrong, even if it ended in disappointment, Sophia deserved to have moments of happiness, deserved to play in the park, deserved to have a friend. With trembling fingers, Julia typed a reply. "Hi, Michael. Sophia talks a lot about Gabriel, too. We'd love to go to the park with you. What time?" Michael's response came almost immediately. "How about 10 in the morning? We can meet at the main entrance, and afterward, if you'd like, we can have a picnic. I'll bring the food. You don't have to worry about a thing." Julia bit her lip, that part about him bringing the food, making the shame burn in her cheeks again. But she swallowed her pride and replied, "Okay, we'll be there. Thanks for the invitation." "Perfect. I can't wait to tell Gabriel. He'll be over the moon. See you Sunday, Julia." See you Sunday. Julia turned off her phone and lay down next to Sophia, pulling her daughter into a protective embrace. She didn't know if she was doing the right thing, but she decided to take a chance, a single chance to see if this was real or just another fleeting illusion. Sunday dawned sunny, one of those perfect spring days in New York where the blue sky finally appears between the clouds of pollution. Julia woke up early, gave Sophia a bath, dressed the girl in the least worn dress she had, a light blue one that was already small, but still fit if she didn't raise her arms too high. She carefully combed her daughter's curls, tied them with a ribbon she had washed especially for the occasion, and looked at her own reflection in the cracked mirror of the shared bathroom. She herself wore a pair of jeans she had bought at a thrift store a few months ago, a simple but clean white blouse, and tied her hair in a low bun. She had no makeup to hide the dark circles from sleepless nights, no perfume to mask the smell of cheap laundry detergent, but she was presentable, and that would have to be enough. They took 2 buses to Central Park, a journey of nearly an hour that Sophia spent glued to the window, pointing at everything she saw and asking 1,000 questions about what they would do in the park. Julia answered patiently, trying to control the anxiety that grew with every block they got closer to their destination. When they finally arrived at the main entrance of the park, Julia saw Michael and Gabriel waiting. The man wore casual clothes, dark jeans and a light button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, and held the hand of Gabriel, who was jumping with excitement when he saw them arrive. The boy let go of his father's hand and ran towards Sophia, and the two children hugged as if they had been friends for years, not just acquaintances from a single meeting. "Hi," Michael greeted Julia with a genuine smile, and there was a kindness in his eyes that made the protective wall she had built crack slightly. "Hi," Julia replied, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot to Gabriel." "And to me too," Michael said, and there was a sincerity in his words that was hard to question. The children were already a few yards ahead, running towards the lake, and the adults followed at a calmer pace. Michael was carrying a large backpack, probably full of the food he had promised to bring, and walked beside Julia, maintaining a respectful distance, not invading her personal space. They walked until they found a wide, shaded lawn perfect for the children to play. Michael spread a large blanket on the ground and began to pull out sandwiches, fruits, juices, cookies, and even a small chocolate cake that made Sophia's eyes sparkle. It was real food, varied, nutritious, the kind of meal Julia could only offer her daughter on very special occasions. The children ate with appetite while chatting animatedly, exchanging stories about school, favorite cartoons, and games they liked. Gabriel showed Sophia how to make little balls with the soft part of the bread and toss them to the birds that approached curiously. Sophia taught Gabriel a song her grandmother used to sing, and the boy tried to follow along off-key, making everyone laugh. While the children played, Michael and Julia talked. At first it was just polite exchanges about the weather, about how beautiful the park was, about how well the children were getting along. But gradually, as Julia began to relax, the conversation deepened. Michael told her about Marina, about how she had been the love of his life, about how the loss still hurt even after 3 years. He spoke about the challenges of raising Gabriel alone, about the constant fear of failing as a father, about how work sometimes consumed so much of his time that he felt guilty for not being present enough. There was a vulnerability in his words that surprised Julia, a willingness to be honest about his weaknesses that was rare in men, especially in powerful men like he clearly was. Julia, in turn, shared a little about her story. She talked about the mother she lost, about the difficulties of raising Sophia alone, about the unstable work and the constant uncertainty. She didn't go into very intimate details, still keeping a shield around the most painful parts of her journey, but she said, enough for Michael to understand the strength she had to muster every day just to survive. The day passed too quickly. The children ran, played tag, fed the ducks in the lake, and climbed safe trees under the watchful eyes of the adults. They laughed until their stomachs hurt, invented imaginary games where they were explorers discovering unknown lands, and when the sun finally began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, they were exhausted and happy. When it was time to say goodbye, Gabriel asked his father if they could schedule another meeting. Sophia looked at her mother with pleading eyes, clearly wanting the same thing. Michael looked at Julia, waiting for her answer, making it clear that the decision was hers. Julia hesitated for only a second before nodding. "We can come back next Sunday if you want." The children's faces lit up and Michael smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It's a date then. Same place, same time." As Julia and Sophia walked towards the bus stop, the little girl couldn't stop talking about the wonderful day they had had, and Julia, looking at the slowly darkening sky, allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. She allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could still happen, that maybe there were good people in the world willing to offer friendship without expecting anything in return, that maybe she and Sophia didn't always have to be alone, always fighting, always just surviving. The wall she had built around her heart was cracking, and for the first time in a long time, Julia didn't try to fix it. She let the cracks widen, let a little light in, let hope, that dangerous and beautiful thing, plant its seeds in soil that had been arid for so long. The Sundays in Central Park became a tradition. Week after week, Michael and Gabriel would meet Julia and Sophia in the same spot, under the same leafy tree that offered generous shade even on the hottest days. The children ran free on the lawn while the adults talked, each meeting unveiling more layers of their stories, building an intimacy that grew naturally like plants finding fertile soil. Michael began to bring discreet gifts, Never anything extravagant that might embarrass Julia, but small gestures that showed attention and care, a coloring book and new colored pencils for Sophia, because Gabriel had mentioned she loved to draw. A pair of children's sneakers in the right size, simply wrapped, with the excuse that Gabriel had outgrown them too quickly and had barely worn them. A change of clothes that was supposedly spare, always in the perfect size for Sophia, always in colors Julia had mentioned her daughter liked. Julia knew these excuses were just that, polite excuses for her to accept without feeling like she was receiving charity. And though her pride screamed to refuse, seeing Sophia's face light up at getting something new, something just, for her, something that wasn't second-hand or mended, made Julia swallow her shame and accept with a whispered thank you that carried far more emotion than the simple words could express. Michael, for his part, discovered in Julia a companionship he hadn't known was missing from his life. She truly listened when he spoke, not just waiting for her turn to talk about herself, as so many people in his social circle did. She asked intelligent questions about his projects, showed genuine interest in his ideas, but also challenged him when she disagreed with something, never with arrogance, but with that quiet wisdom of someone who had learned about life through experience, not through business books or expensive seminars. Julia spoke about education with a passion that made her eyes shine, about how she dreamed of one day being able to teach children about the stories she invented for Sophia, and how the girl absorbed knowledge like a sponge. She spoke about the small miracles of everyday life, about how a flower growing in a crack in the pavement could be more beautiful than any carefully planned garden, about how happiness was in the simple things that most people know, longer even notice. Michael found himself thinking about her during the week, during important meetings where he should have been focused on spreadsheets and profit projections. He thought about the way she smiled when Sophia did something funny, the way she looked at the sky when she was thinking about something deep, the way she bit her lower lip when she was nervous. He thought about how she was strong without needing to shout her strength, how she was dignified without needing to show off, how she was beautiful without even realizing it. And just when his feelings were beginning to take a more defined shape, when Michael was already considering telling Julia how he felt, when the fragile sandcastle they were building finally seemed solid, everything crumbled in the cruelest way possible. It was an ordinary Thursday, and Julia had secured a cleaning job in a luxury apartment through the service app she used. The address was on the Upper East Side, and when she saw the location, her heart skipped a beat. It was the same area where Michael had mentioned he lived, but New York City was huge, and the Upper East Side had hundreds of streets and thousands of apartments. The chances of it being in his exact building were minimal, or at least that's what Julia tried to convince herself as she took 2 buses to the location. When she arrived at the address, she recognized it immediately. It was the same luxurious condominium where she had worked weeks before, where she had first seen Michael in his natural element, surrounded by businessmen, talking about millions as if they were cents. Julia's stomach churned, but she took a deep breath and went inside. She needed the money. The rent was late, and her landlady had already made it clear she wouldn't tolerate any more delays. The doorman recognized her and let her up without the same hostile ceremony as the first time. Julia took the service elevator, looking at her blurred reflection in the metal doors, trying to mentally prepare for a few more hours of hard work. When she got off on the indicated floor, she followed the service corridor to the back door of the apartment she was supposed to clean. She rang the bell and waited. No one answered. She rang again. Silence. She was about to call the number the client had left when she heard voices coming from inside the apartment. Male voices, speaking in a professional tone. Julia hesitated, unsure whether to ring a third time or wait. That's when the door opened abruptly, and Julia found herself face to face with Michael. He was wearing an impeccable grey suit, a navy blue tie, and Italian shoes that probably cost more than Julia's entire wardrobe combined. He had his cell phone pressed to his ear, clearly in the middle of an important call, and when his eyes met hers, the surprise was mutual and devastating. Michael froze for a second. That seemed to last an eternity. Julia saw a sequence of emotions flash across his eyes: surprise, confusion, recognition, and then, what she feared most, embarrassment. He opened his mouth to say something, but at that moment, a voice called from inside the apartment. "Michael, the video conference with the Japanese investors starts in 5 minutes. We're waiting for you." The voice was authoritative, impatient. Michael covered the phone's microphone with his hand. "Julia, I didn't know it was you." "Wait a second. Please, I need to—" He gestured vaguely towards the inside of the apartment, towards the meeting that clearly couldn't be interrupted. Julia felt as if she had been punched in the gut. "You don't have to worry, I'm here to work." Her voice came out firm, controlled, even though inside she was falling apart. "No, you don't understand, Michael tried again, but the voice from inside called out once more irritated this time. Michael looked at Julia with a tortured expression, clearly torn between staying to explain and returning to the multi-million-dollar meeting that awaited him. And in that moment of hesitation, Julia saw everything she needed to see. She saw the brutal difference between the worlds they inhabited. She saw that no matter how kind he was, no matter how sincere he seemed, in the end, she would always be the cleaning lady, and he would always be the boss. There would always be that insurmountable chasm between them. "Go. Your meeting is important. I know where the service area is," Julia said, forcing a professional smile that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. "Julia, please." Michael tried to gently take her arm, but she pulled away, not harshly, but firmly enough to make the message clear. "I need to work, Mr. Stevens, don't worry." The formality in her address was like a slap in the face to both of them. Michael swallowed hard, and Julia saw the hurt in his eyes, but he nodded and went back inside the apartment, closing the door between them with a soft click that echoed like thunder in Julia's heart. She stood in the hallway for a long minute, trying to control her breathing, trying not to let the tears burning behind her eyes fall. Then, with mechanical movements, she went to the service area where the apartment owner, who Julia now understood to be Michael's executive assistant, had left the cleaning supplies and a list of tasks. For the next 3 hours, Julia cleaned that apartment with an almost violent precision. She scrubbed the floor until her reflection was perfect, wiped every surface until it shone, organized every object with meticulous care. She could hear, muffled by the closed office door, the voices from the meeting. She could hear Michael speaking fluent English with the Japanese investors, his voice firm and confident, so different from the soft, gentle tone he used when he talked to her on Sundays in the park. With every minute that passed, the reality became clearer and clearer. This was Michael Stevens's real world. International business, multi-million-dollar investments, meetings with powerful executives. And her world? It was this one. On her knees on the floor, scrubbing bathrooms, cleaning up other people's messes invisible to the eyes of those who truly mattered. The Sundays in the park had been an illusion, a pleasant fantasy where they could pretend the difference between their worlds didn't exist, that they were just two people getting to know each other, that their children could be friends without it being strange or inappropriate. But reality always collects its due, and the reality was this. She was on the outside of the door, he was on the inside, making decisions that moved fortunes while she decided between paying the electric bill or buying food for the week. When she finished her work, Julia gathered her supplies, checked that everything was perfect, and left through the service door without looking back. She didn't leave a note, didn't wait to say goodbye. She just left, went down the service elevator, past the doorman without making eye contact, and walked to the bus stop with the automatic steps of someone running on autopilot. On the bus ride home, looking out the fogged-up window at the passing city, Julia made a decision. She had to protect herself and Sophia. She had to end this fantasy before things got even more complicated, before the feelings she barely had the courage to admit to herself grew stronger, before Sophia became so attached to Gabriel that the inevitable separation would hurt her irreparably. When Michael tried to call that night, Julia didn't answer. When he sent a message asking if everything was okay, if they could talk, she replied only that she was busy. When he insisted, asking about the following Sunday in the park, she said she had other commitments and couldn't go. The days turned into weeks, and Julia kept her distance. She made up excuses for Sophia about why they weren't seeing Gabriel and his father anymore. She said they must be very busy, that maybe they had traveled, that sometimes friendships are like that. They come and go like the seasons. Sophia cried, asked what she had done wrong, why Gabriel didn't like her anymore, and each of her daughter's tears was a sharp blade in Julia's heart, but she stood firm in her decision. It was better to have a sharp pain now than a prolonged agony later. Michael, on the other side of the city, was desperate. He didn't understand what had happened, why Julia had pulled away so abruptly. He replayed every moment of that encounter in the hallway, every word spoken, trying to identify where he had gone wrong. Gabriel asked about Sophia every day, questioning when they would see their friends again, and Michael had no answers to give. It was a Sunday afternoon, 4 weeks after that fateful encounter, that Michael decided he needed answers. He couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore, couldn't stand seeing Gabriel sad, couldn't stand the void that Julia's absence had left in his life. He had fallen in love with her, and this truth he had been trying to deny to himself was now impossible to ignore. He had fallen for her strength, for the tenderness with which she treated Sophia, for the wisdom in her words, for the way she made him want to be a better person. Using the resources at his disposal, something he would normally never do out of respect for people's privacy, Michael managed to get the address where Julia lived. It wasn't difficult. A call to the service app, an explanation that he needed to return something she had forgotten, and he had the information. He knew he was crossing a line, invading her space in a way that might not be welcome, but he had to try. He had to at least understand. On Sunday afternoon, Michael parked his car a few blocks from the address. He didn't want to draw attention with the imported vehicle in a neighborhood where such cars were clearly uncommon. He walked the streets, observing the stark differences between this neighborhood and his own. The houses were simple, many in need of repair. The sidewalks were cracked. Children played in the street because there were no parks nearby. The smell of sewage escaped from some poorly covered manholes. When he reached the building where Julia lived, Michael stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. It was an old building, with peeling paint, windows with rusted bars, and a dark entrance that smelled of mildew. He thought of his spacious penthouse with a view of the park, with all the security and comfort that money could buy. And then he thought of Julia and Sophia living here, in these conditions, and felt a mixture of admiration for her strength and shame for never having truly understood how difficult her life was. He climbed the stairs. The elevator was clearly broken for a long time, and when he reached the 3rd floor he looked for the apartment. He found the door, an old wooden door with peeling paint, and took a deep breath before knocking. He heard light footsteps on the other side, and then Julia's voice asking who it was. When he answered, the silence that followed was deafening. He imagined Julia on the other side of the door, probably debating with herself whether or not to open it. Finally, the door opened, but only a crack, the security chain still in place. Julia looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise, anger, and something else that Michael couldn't identify. She wore simple house clothes, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, and yet Michael found her to be the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "What are you doing here?" Julia's voice came out cold, controlled. "I needed to talk to you. You don't answer my calls. You don't reply to my messages. Julia, what happened? What did I do wrong?" Sophia appeared behind her mother, and when she saw Michael, her face lit up. "Uncle Michael, where's Gabriel?" Julia placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, gentle but firm. "Sophia, go to your room, please. The grown-ups need to talk." "But, Mom, I want to see Gabriel," the girl protested, and Michael saw tears starting to form in her eyes. "Later, sweetie. Now go," Julia insisted, and Sophia left, dragging her feet, looking back several times before disappearing behind a curtain that divided the small room. Julia unlatched the chain and opened the door fully, but she didn't invite Michael in. She crossed her arms in front of her chest in a defensive posture. "How did you get my address?" "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. You had no right to invade my privacy like this." "You're right. It was invasive, and I apologize for that. But I'm desperate, Julia. I don't understand what happened. We were getting to know each other. Gabriel and Sophia were happy, and then you just disappeared." "You know exactly what happened," Julia replied, her voice trembling slightly, despite her effort to keep it steady. "No, I really don't." Was it because of that day at the apartment? Because you were there to work? Julia, if that's it, you need to listen to me. Listen to what? That you feel sorry for me. That you're such a good man you don't mind that the woman you're building a friendship with is the person who cleans your toilets. The words came out laden with a pain Julia couldn't hide. Is that what you think? That I pity you? Michael took a step forward, but Julia stepped back, maintaining the distance between them. Julia, I don't care what you do for a living. I care about who you are, and you are one of the strongest, bravest, most genuine people I have ever met. You live in a different world than I do, Michael. Julia shook her head, tears finally escaping from the corners of her eyes. You make decisions that move millions. I decide whether to pay the rent or buy food for my daughter. You have meetings with Japanese investors. I clean the messes of people who don't even know my name. It won't work. It can't work. It's key. Why not? Michael insisted, his voice thick with emotion. Because society says it shouldn't. Because people will judge. Julia, I've spent the last 3 years living according to other people's expectations, doing what was expected of me, dating who my social circle approved of, keeping up appearances. And you know what that got me? Emptiness. Loneliness. A life that looks beautiful on the outside but is completely hollow on the inside. He took a deep breath before continuing. Since Marina died, I was sure I would never feel anything for anyone again. That part of me had died with her. But then I met you, and for the first time in 3 years I felt alive again. I felt truly seen, not for my money or my position, but for who I really am. And I know you feel something too. I know it because I see it in the way you look at me, in the way you smile when I talk to Sophia, in the way you relax when we're together. Julia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, but new ones kept falling. Even if I did feel something, and I'm not saying I do, it wouldn't change anything. People will look at us and see the billionaire businessman with the house cleaner. They'll think I'm with you for the money, that I'm just another gold digger trying to get a payday. And Gabriel? How do you think it will be for him at school when they find out his friend's mom is a cleaner? So what? Michael raised his voice, not in anger but in frustration. So what if that's what people think? I'm not asking for their approval. I'm asking for a chance for us to see where this could go. I'm not promising it will be easy, Julia. I know there will be challenges, there will be people who judge, there will be difficult moments. But the only thing I know for sure is that I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering, what if? Julia remained silent, tears still streaming down her face. She could hear Sophia crying softly behind the curtain, and that sound broke the last defenses she was trying to maintain. I'm scared, Julia finally confessed, her voice coming out in a broken whisper. I'm scared to believe this is real and then find out it's an illusion. I'm scared Sophia will get attached and then suffer when it all falls apart. I'm scared of falling in love with you and then realizing I'm just a charity project, a good deed to make you feel better about yourself. Look at me, Michael asked softly. Please. Julia lifted her eyes and met his gaze. There were so many emotions there she could barely breathe. You are not a project. You are not charity. You are the woman who made me laugh for the first time in 3 years. You are the person who makes me want to be better, not for business but as a human being. You are someone who reminds me every day of what truly matters in life. And yes, I'm in love with you, Julia. Completely, hopelessly in love. And I know that's scary. It scares you and it scares me too. But I'm here asking you to be brave one more time, to give us a chance. And what about the differences? What about the money, the social status, everything that separates us? That's all superficial. At the end of the day, what matters is if we make each other happy. If we want to build something together. If we're willing to face the challenges side by side. And I am willing, Julia. The question is, are you? Julia looked back, towards the curtain where Sophia was hiding, probably listening to every word. She looked around the small room that was her world, with its stained walls and old furniture. And then she looked back at Michael, at this man who had everything and yet was here, at the door of her humble home, with his heart in his hand, asking for a chance. And for the first time in a long time, Julia decided to choose hope over fear. She decided to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could truly transcend all the barriers the world insists on building between people. "Okay," she said, her voice still trembling, but with a growing firmness. "Let's try, but slowly, Michael. I need to protect my daughter, and I need to protect my heart too." Michael smiled, and it was a smile so genuine, so full of relief and happiness, that Julia felt her own heart warm. "Slow is perfect. I'll respect your pace, your boundaries. We'll build this together, in whatever time it takes." Just then, Sophia came running from behind the curtain and jumped into Julia's arms. "Does this mean we're going to see Gabriel again, Mummy?" Julia looked at Michael, who nodded with a smile. "Yes, my love. We're going to see Gabriel again." The little girl celebrated with a shout of joy that echoed through the small apartment, and even the neighbors, who were probably listening to everything through the thin walls, must have smiled at that pure, contagious happiness. Michael left a few minutes later, but not before arranging another meeting in the park for the following Sunday. When the door closed behind him, Julia leaned against it and slid to the floor, covering her face with her hands. She didn't know if she had made the right choice, didn't know if this would end well, but for the first time in a long time, she decided to trust what she felt, to trust Michael, to trust that sometimes life can surprise you in a good way. The months that followed brought changes Julia could never have imagined. What began as cautious meetings on Sundays in the park gradually transformed into something much deeper and more significant. Michael respected Julia's every request for space, for time, for her boundaries to be respected. He never pushed, never tried to rush things, never used his money or influence to try to impress her or make her feel indebted. Instead, he courted her in the oldest and most sincere way possible, with time, with attention, with genuine presence. He started visiting her during the week, always calling ahead, always bringing something simple like fresh bread from the bakery or fruit from the market, never extravagant gifts that would make her uncomfortable. They would sit in the small living room of her modest apartment while the children played and talk for hours about everything and nothing, about childhood, about dreams, about fears, about hopes. Julia told him things she had never told anyone, about how she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night with her heart racing, terrified at the thought of not being able to pay the rent and ending up on the street with Sophia, about how there were days she ate just enough to keep from fainting, saving the rest of the food to ensure her daughter wouldn't go hungry, about how she felt invisible, in the eyes of society, just one more among millions of women who supported their families with hard work and were treated as if they didn't matter. Michael listened to everything without judgment, without trying to minimize her pain, without offering easy solutions that sounded like disguised charity. He simply held Julia's hand when she cried, offered his shoulder when the weight became too heavy, and said simple words that meant everything. "I see you. You matter. You are incredible." He also shared his own vulnerabilities. He talked about the guilt he carried for working so much, for sometimes leaving Gabriel with nannies and drivers while he closed deals on the other side of the world, about how Marina had been not just his wife, but his moral compass, and how since she passed, he felt like he was navigating without direction, just accumulating money and success without really understanding why, about how he was afraid Gabriel would grow up spoiled and detached from reality, without understanding the value of things, without developing empathy for people who didn't have the same advantages. It was Julia who pointed out, with her quiet wisdom, that Gabriel was an extraordinary child precisely because Michael was a present father in the moments that truly mattered, that it wasn't about the quantity of time but the quality, that Gabriel had offered food to Sophia that night in the diner because he had learned from his father about empathy, about seeing others as human beings, about acting when you see someone in need. As the months went by, Gabriel and Sophia became inseparable. Michael began to pick up Sophia to play with Gabriel at his house, always with Julia's careful permission. The first time Sophia saw the penthouse where they lived, her eyes nearly popped out, gave her head. It was like stepping into a fairy tale, with rooms bigger than her entire apartment. Enough toys for a whole store, a heated rooftop pool, and a view of New York City that looked like it was from a postcard. Julia was tense during that first visit, worried that Sophia would be too dazzled, that she would start to be ashamed of where they lived, that she would want things Julia could never give her. But Michael, with his growing sensitivity to her feelings, had a talk with Gabriel before that visit. He explained to his son that not everyone had the same things they did, that this didn't make anyone better or worse, just different, that Sophia and Julia were incredible people, not because of what they had, but because of who they were. That true wealth was in character, in kindness, in the strength to overcome adversity. Gabriel, with the surprising wisdom children sometimes show, understood perfectly. When Sophia arrived, he showed her his toys, but what he enjoyed most was building a fort with sheets in the living room, creating an imaginary world where the expensive toys were set aside and imagination reigned supreme. It was during one of those days, while Julia and Michael watched the children play, that he finally said the 3 words that had been burning in his chest for weeks. "I love you, Julia." He said it simply, without fanfare, without grand romantic gestures, just the plain, unvarnished truth. Julia looked at him, tears already beginning to form. Part of her wanted to say it back, because it was true. She loved him too, had fallen in love with this man who was so different from what she imagined rich men to be. But another part of her was still afraid, still wondered if this was real, if it would last, if it wasn't just a passing phase for Michael before he returned to the world of sophisticated women who suited him. "I know you're scared," Michael continued, as if he could read her thoughts. "And that's okay. You don't have to say it back right now. I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that this isn't fleeting for me, Julia. You've changed my life. You've changed Gabriel's life. And I don't want to go back to living without you." Julia finally let the tears fall freely. "I love you too," she whispered, and it was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I'm scared, yes, but I love you, and that's bigger than the fear." They kissed for the first time that day, a gentle kiss, full of promises and hopes. A kiss that sealed something between them, something they both knew would change everything. But like any story that seems to be heading for a happy ending, there were still obstacles to face. The biggest one came from where Michael least expected it, his own family. Michael had 2 younger brothers, Richard and Henry, both also successful businessmen, and a sister, Beatrice, married to an influential politician. When Michael finally told his family about Julia, the reaction was immediate and devastating. Richard was the most direct. "Have you lost your mind, Michael? A cleaning lady. Do you have any idea what people will say? What this will do to the family's reputation? To the business?" Henry was more cautious with his words, but no less cruel in his message. "I understand you've been lonely since Marina died, but you don't have to lower yourself like this. There are thousands of women suited to your social level. Why do you have to choose one who is clearly after your money?" Beatrice was the worst. Worried about public image and how this could affect her husband's political career, she suggested that Michael could certainly keep Julia as a diversion, as long as he was discreet, but that thinking of anything serious, of introducing her to society, of making her part of the family, was completely unacceptable. Michael listened to it all in silence, anger building like a storm inside him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but laced, with a coldness his siblings rarely heard. "You want to know what lowering myself is? This is judging a person by what she does to survive, instead of by who she is. Julia is one of the strongest, most principled, most generous people I've ever met. She's raising a wonderful child on her own, works hard every day and maintains her dignity even when life tries to take it from her, and you have the audacity to call her a gold digger?" Richard tried to interrupt, but Michael raised his hand, silencing him. "I'm not finished. You think she's with me for the money? Julia refuses half the things I try to give her. She gets embarrassed when I pay for dinner. She insists on contributing what she can, even if it's little. She loves me not in spite of who I am, but for who I am when I'm with her. And you know what? Gabriel is happier, more empathetic, more human since he met Sophia and Julia. So if you think I'm going to give that up, that I'm going to hide the woman I love because you're worried about what society will say, then you don't know me at all." He looked at each of his brothers and his sister. Julia is going to be a part of my life, and consequently, she's going to be a part of your family too. You can accept that with grace, or you can continue with this ridiculous prejudice. But know this, if you force me to choose between her and you, I will choose her without hesitation." The silence that followed was tense and uncomfortable. Beatrice was the first to leave, muttering something about being disappointed in his choices. Richard and Henry stayed a few minutes longer, trying to make him see reason, but when they realized Michael wouldn't change his mind, they also left, leaving a veiled warning about the consequences his choices could have for the family business. Michael was left alone in his office, looking out at the city from the huge window, and for the first time in his life he didn't care what his family thought. He was absolutely certain he had made the right choice. But his family's reaction was just the beginning. When Michael started taking Julia to social events, publicly introducing her as his girlfriend, the judgment from New York's high society was brutal. There were looks of disdain in expensive restaurants, malicious whispers at gala parties, articles in society columns speculating about her true intentions. Julia suffered with every look, with every malicious comment that reached her. There were nights she cried in Michael's arms, questioning if he wouldn't be happier with someone from his own world, someone who could talk about investments and stocks without getting lost, someone who knew which fork to use at a 15-course dinner. But Michael always reminded her that those people didn't matter, that the opinion of someone who judged based on a bank account instead of character was worthless, that he had lived for years trying to please that hypocritical society and had never been so unhappy. That since meeting Julia, he finally understood what Marina had always tried to teach him. That success isn't measured in money, but in love, in genuine connections, in the legacies we leave in people's hearts. It was during a particularly difficult charity event, where Julia had been practically ignored by the other women present and overheard nasty comments about her dress, that everything changed. Michael, who had momentarily stepped away to speak with an important partner, returned to find Julia alone in a corner, trying to hold back tears. Without a word, he took her by the hand and led her to the stage where the charity auction was taking place. He took the microphone from the surprised host's hands and asked for everyone's attention. "Good evening. I know this isn't the scheduled time for speeches, but I need to say something important." The room fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on him. "Many of you here have known me for years. You know my family, my business, my story. And I know many of you are also talking about the woman standing beside me, Julia Smith." Julia tried to pull her hand away, embarrassed, but Michael held it firmly, gentle but determined. "I want you all to know who she really is. Julia is a woman who lost her mother at 25 and was left alone to raise a young child, who works every day, often 2 or 3 jobs, to ensure her daughter has a roof over her head and food on the table, who never asked for help, never expected life to be easy, just worked hard and held her head high even when circumstances tried to knock her down." He looked at Julia, love and admiration shining in his eyes. "She is stronger than half the men I know, has more integrity than most people in this room, and loves with a depth that has taught me what truly matters in life. So yes, I am in love with her, deeply, completely in love. And anyone who has a problem with that can direct their questions directly to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Some people looked shocked, others embarrassed. A few were smiling discreetly. Michael handed back the microphone and left the event with Julia, without looking back, without caring about the consequences. In the car on the way home, Julia finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that. Now they'll judge you too." Michael took her hand and kissed her fingers. "Let them judge. I'm tired of living for the approval of others. I want to live for what makes me happy, and what makes me happy is you." Julia finally smiled, her tears now of happiness instead of pain. "I love you too. And thank you for defending me, for valuing me, for making me feel like I deserve to be loved. You deserve every good thing this world has to offer, Julia, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make sure you have it." The months turned into a year of challenges, yes, but also of immeasurable joy. Gabriel and Sophia were officially siblings of the heart, inseparable in all their adventures. Julia, with Michael's encouragement and support, had gone back to school, studying education in college, fulfilling her old dream of becoming a teacher. Michael had created a social program through his company, offering scholarships and job opportunities for single mothers in vulnerable situations, inspired by Julia's story. Michael's family eventually came around. It started with Henry, who, after a few months of silence, approached his brother and apologized for his initial prejudice. He confessed that after getting to know Julia properly, he realized Michael was right, that she was special. Richard took longer, but he too eventually apologized. Beatrice was the last, but when she finally relented and invited Julia and Sophia for a family lunch, she admitted she had been wrong and had a lot to learn about what truly matters in life. It was on a quiet evening, almost a year and a half after that first meeting at the diner, that Michael prepared something special. He had taken Julia and Sophia to dinner at that same simple diner in Astoria where it had all begun. They sat at the same table, ordered the same dishes, and reminisced about that magical night that had changed everything. When they finished eating, Michael took Julia's hand. With Gabriel and Sophia watching with knowing smiles, he knelt beside the table, pulling a small blue velvet box from his pocket. "Julia Smith, you came into my life in a way I could never have planned or imagined. You taught me about true strength, about unconditional love, about what really matters when you strip away all the superficial layers of life. You made me want to be a better man, a better father, a better human being. And I don't want to spend a single day of my life without you by my side." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring with a discreet diamond that reflected the soft light of the diner. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me with all the challenges that may come, with all the differences the world insists on highlighting, but also with all the love I know we can share?" Julia was crying, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure happiness. Around them, the other diner patrons had noticed what was happening and were watching in respectful silence. Sophia was jumping with excitement next to Gabriel, who had a grin from ear to ear. "Yes," Julia finally managed to say, her voice broken with emotion. "Yes, I will. I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes, and love you every day for the rest of my life." Michael placed the ring on her finger and pulled her in for a kiss as the entire diner erupted in applause and cheers. Gabriel and Sophia ran to hug them both, creating a small huddle of love and joy that made everyone around them smile. That night, as they drove home, Sophia asleep in the back seat next to Gabriel, Julia looked at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing it was real. She looked at Michael driving beside her, and she saw not the billionaire businessman, not the powerful man who commanded an empire, but simply the man she loved, the man who loved her back, the man who had proven that true love can indeed transcend all the barriers society tries to impose. "I never imagined that asking for a cup of water in a diner would change my whole life," Julia said softly. Michael took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing it gently. "I never imagined that teaching my son about empathy would bring me the greatest gift I could ever receive. You." They married 6 months later, in a simple but beautiful ceremony in the same Central Park, where they had spent so many Sundays building their story. It wasn't the grand party society expected, but an intimate celebration with the people who truly mattered. Gabriel was the best man, Sophia the flower girl, and when Michael and Julia exchanged the vows they had written for each other, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Julia promised to love Michael not despite their differences, but because of them, because it was those very differences that had made them grow, learn, and become better people. Michael promised to honor Julia's strength, to value her voice, and to never forget the lessons she had taught him about what truly matters in life. And when the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, and they kissed under the blue New York sky, with Gabriel and Sophia applauding by their side, it was impossible not to feel that this was exactly the ending their individual stories of loss, pain, and struggle deserved. Not an ending where all problems magically disappeared, but one where love, respect, and commitment gave them the strength to face any challenge that came their way. The life they built together was not always easy. There were still moments of insecurity for Julia, days when she wondered if she truly belonged in that world. There were still occasional judgments from people who couldn't see past appearances. There were still challenges in blending two families, two histories, two such different worlds. But every night when they lay down together, when Michael wrapped Julia in his arms and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, everything made sense. Because they had chosen each other. Because they had decided that the love they felt was greater than any obstacle. Because they had proven, not just to the world but to themselves, that when two people meet with pure intentions, with open hearts, with a genuine will to build something real, nothing can stop them. Gabriel and Sophia grew up as true siblings, united not by blood, but by something much stronger, by choice, by love, by a family that was built through empathy, kindness, and the courage to believe that differences can become bridges instead of walls. Julia fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher and opened a small school in an underserved community in New York, offering quality education to children who, like Sophia had been, deserved chances the world often denied. Michael supported the project not with thoughtless money, but with true partnership, helping to build the structure, recruit teachers, and create programs that made a real difference in the children's lives. And every Friday night, no matter how busy they were, no matter what other commitments arose, Michael, Julia, Gabriel, and Sophia went to that same simple diner in Astoria. They sat at the same table, ordered the same dishes, and remembered the night it all began. The night a 7-year-old boy saw a hungry girl and decided to share. The night a father decided to teach empathy by example. The night a mother, despite her shame and fear, accepted help and opened her heart to the possibility that good things could still happen. That simple diner had witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. Not just a romance, but a transformation. The living proof that when we choose to see one another as human beings, when we decide to act with kindness, even when it would be easier to look away, when we have the courage to love beyond the barriers society builds, we can create miracles. And this is the most beautiful miracle of all, that true love knows no social class, doesn't care about a bank account, and doesn't see differences as obstacles but as opportunities to learn, grow, and become more complete. Julia and Michael proved that when two hearts meet with sincerity, when two souls decide to unite with respect and commitment, nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop them from building something beautiful, lasting, and profoundly meaningful. And that sometimes, the greatest loves of our lives arrive in the most unexpected ways, in the most unlikely places, at the moments we least expect but need them most. This is the story of how a child's simple gesture transformed into a legacy of love, empathy, and hope. This is the story of how Julia and Michael, from such different worlds, found in each other exactly what they were unknowingly looking for. And this is, above all, the story that true love, the kind that transforms, that heals, that elevates, can blossom anywhere, as long as it finds hearts willing to nurture it, to protect it, and to believe in it against all odds.